Welcome to Meet Your Mentor. I'm Jack Scott, your host and the Chief Operations Officer of the Mentor Project. For these next few minutes, I will be interviewing one of our world-class mentors. As you listen, you will gain insights into their individual lives as they share their personal journeys of their successes and failures. We will discuss some of the best and worst career advice they have ever received, and I will have them describe in their own words what it means to be a mentor. So without further ado, let's get to it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm super excited because the guest we have tonight is a data scientist and a wealth of knowledge. A lot of what he does goes over my head just a little bit, but I am extremely excited to be chatting with Joe Hoeller tonight. Joe is actually developing one of our coding programs for our children, and his approach is just fascinating because he is able to break down math in a very simple and easy to understand way, and then couple that with Python coding and the understanding of coding and how that is tied to math. So it's just fascinating. But tonight we're really just going to dig into more about Joe Hoeller. He is a computer vision engineer. He specializes in graphs, neural networks, coupled with what is called a convolutional neural network. And he does this by using OpenCV, PyTorch, and deep learning. He has a wealth of knowledge in this space, some of the stuff that I've never even heard of. And he's extremely humble, and I am so excited to be meeting with you today, Joe. Joe, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. And how are you this evening?
I'm doing really well. I'm glad we were finally able to make this happen with a couple of changes on our schedules and everything. I'm so excited to finally get you on the show. You have a wealth of knowledge. Data scientist. I know that I have already shared your bio with our listeners, but I would love if you could tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself, maybe how you got into the career and maybe some information we wouldn't find about you, like information we wouldn't find about you that's on your LinkedIn.
Sure. So, kind of had an interesting career. I started out initially as a UX designer many years ago, and that transitioned into programming for front-end web-based development. And then as the market needs changed, and of course, I've always had a very curious mind. Even before I got into programming, I would research the NASA document server for technical manuals and schematics. And I actually reverse engineered a regenerative hydrogen fuel cell that they put in the satellites just for fun. I built a very lab scale size version of it, and it was just to learn. It wasn't, just a fun project. And so that curiosity kind of just, transferred over when I started to get into IT and tech and things like that. And so then I became a front end developer, and then I became a back end developer. Then I got into DevOps, and like I said, as the market needs changed, I started just teaching myself linear algebra, multivariate calculus, statistics, and started building out machine learning models and specialized specifically in computer vision because autonomous vehicles and, things like that, it's intriguing to me.
Yeah, no big deal. I made it to college algebra. I felt pretty proud of myself.
It's a good start.
It is. I know we've definitely talked about math before, and I'd love to dive into that further in my career. We'll see if I go back into that direction. Math was just never my strong suit, but it sounds like you have a knack for it. Did you feel like you were just gifted at math when you started digging into it?
No, absolutely not. It was very daunting and hard and intimidating at first. And, I believe we had this conversation before. There's, in these technical spaces, in math and science or just STEM in general, there's a lot of $1 million phrases for nickel concepts. And you have to break it down and teach it to yourself in a way that's in its most simplest form. And I think that's how you learn it. You have to break it down into very small things instead of trying to look at the whole and say, oh my God, I have all this stuff to learn. No, just focus on that one specific granular thing and then move on to the next. That makes sense. That's attached to it in some sort of order, so you have some result at the end, but a very small result. You don't have a global or overarching thing completed or learned. It's just one small component of the whole.
I always look at cybersecurity as a language, and it is a language. Like a few different coding languages, but even more so than that, like I've learned French. And when I got out of the military and went into the cybersecurity sector on the civilian side, it was a new language for me. And the best advice that I gave myself, and it sounds like you did the same thing, was I got into it and it was very intimidating, but I trusted the process. And I knew that the more I studied and the more I researched and the more that I learned, just kept learning and learning, I started to learn the language and the language started to build on themselves. And the cybersecurity industry is very broad, yet it overlaps. It might not overlap greatly, but there are things that I probably know in your sector, maybe not a great deal, that you know more of, and then vice versa, because that's just how this sector works. In being in your field and starting from scratch and learning math and diving into it and it being daunting for you, along the way, I would assume that you probably had mentors, teachers, coaches, and you're a mentor at the Mentor Project, and we're so happy to have you here. You're actually, and we'll talk about this later, you're putting a coding program together for us, which we're so excited about. But as a mentor at the Mentor Project, what does it mean to you to be a mentor here and provide that soon-to-be coding class to the children around the world eventually? What does that mean to you?
Well, it's something that I can give back. I understand for a lot of people going through life, it's not easy. I didn't have the best upbringing as a child growing up, and I had definitely some very serious challenges to overcome growing up in the inner city as a teenager. And in that era in the '90s, it was much different. It was a lot of survival skills that were learned, right? And when we grow up in a lot of dysfunction and we see this, we don't really understand how to function right. All of a sudden we turn 18 and we're supposed to be adults. Well, the reality is it's not like that. And I feel looking back that if I had, somebody redirect me in some way, especially maybe into tech, maybe into coding, whatever, I think, potentially, my life would have taken a different path early on. And I just want to be able to have the experience where I do look forward to working with all the kids, because I think also they'll make me better as well, because it's a learning experience for me. And I also have that opportunity to give back and say, hey, I was in your shoes once. I know what it's like. And, these are the things that we can do to pull away from that dysfunction and focus on positive things. So when we do turn 18, we have opportunity to get away from, these bad environments that we're growing up in, essentially.
You touched on it a little bit, Joe, and I want to dig a little bit more into it with the fact of understanding the skill set that you want to provide to the children to help them with their future career growth, not just career growth, but their current trajectory of life and helping change that trajectory of their life. Mm-hmm. If we have some kids on this call listening in to this podcast right now, and I would be interested to hear if you could provide them some insight, and say you're sitting in front of a mentee right now as their mentor, what would be some insight that you could provide them that could help guide them into the career field that you're in right now?
I would say set aside time each day, block off your calendar. Google Calendar is free. You can get it on your phone. Um, and that make that your study time and focus on like 2 hours a day and just focus and write code, learn the syntax, do the tutorials that are available online or even preferably through us. And stay curious, keep learning and pushing through because, one of the goals of the program that we're putting together here is the long term of it is to give the skill sets needed to have a strong GitHub to get a job, which is a code repository for people to showcase their code projects, and also compete in Kaggle data science competitions where the students have the opportunity to earn actually substantial sums of money for themselves or for their team. And so to me, that's a springboard to, fund college, to move out, when they turn 18, to have something that's tangible to say, hey, I have this skill set. I've been focusing on this for the last 4 years of high school or whatever. And now that's a pathway to a rather high-paying job as a junior programmer, a junior data scientist. The salaries typically, depending upon the town or city that you're in, you're looking at $80 to $115,000 a year. And if you grow up in poverty, that's life-changing for you and your family.
Wow, that's awesome. Would you like to share with the listeners a little bit about what you're building out for the summer fall program? I know that we probably have some kids on the call right now that would probably be interested in that. I would just like maybe a quick insight. And you don't have to, but I love what you're building out and just your overall vision of what you would like to see within this coding program that you're creating.
Mm-hmm. So, coming from the background that I came from, I never thought I was good enough, and I always thought I was too stupid to understand these complicated things when we hear about AI, ML, coding, IT, tech, etc. And what happened was when I started teaching myself, I realized that the way they teach these things in math in general in school is that it was taught to me in a way that wasn't conducive to my learning curve. And I also have a learning disability, I have attention deficit disorder. And so I wasn't good at the math tests. I didn't do good in school generally, things like that. But then when I started coding and I started doing math with code, it was a different learning curve and it all started to click. Linear algebra, geometry, graph theory, understanding, matrix mathematics or matrix multipliers and things like that. And as I kept doing it every day for, a few hours, eventually it all culminated to a fine understanding to where now I'm looking at this curriculum like if I had to transfer this knowledge, I'm going back in my mind because I'm going back like 10, 15 years now. How did I teach myself? Because not everybody had, to lead into a different discussion, but unfortunately, public schools in the inner city aren't as well funded as private schools or schools in the suburbs. So the curriculum isn't advanced. It's not. It's really just inadequate overall, and at least the schools I went to. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm doing is looking at how I taught myself and breaking down this outline of the initial introduction is just general mathematics and some algebra and code. And I think once the kids start trying it that way, it's really going to turn on a light bulb and they're going to see how cool it is that they can generate a graph and a picture and an image and things like that, all by just coding in a few lines and being able to understand that math with that code syntax. And, from there, I hope, they want to stick with it and keep learning and keep evolving. So we can get into, some IoT development and, computer vision and some deep learning, which would be like the next phase after we, get that foundation in.
I know I want to take your class, and I'm not even a high school or college kid. So I'll fit that into my already busy schedule, but I would love to learn that. I think it's a great skill. So what I want to ask you, Joe, is I love this question. I like the challenge behind it, but as a mentor and understanding what a mentor's role is, in your mentor here at the Mentor Project, and soon to be running one of our coding class programs that we have coming up in the summer, and you'll have a lot of mentees underneath you. Can you put the what a mentor means to you into a single word, and why that particular word?
I think it could potentially be multifaceted because everybody's perception is different, right? We all draw from different experiences, and having been through a lot has given me a lot of different life experiences and the ability to look at things through the lens of others and how other different people with different backgrounds would perceive me or the program. And my hope is that it's a beacon of light for people, so to follow, to give them hope that there is a better future. And now is the time to make that change, because if you don't make the time now, when will you make that time? And that's, the message that I hope to be able to send out and fulfill, because it's all about changing lives and seeing people grow and move up, in the ladder of life, essentially.
Well said. I feel like there was a quote in there, but that's not till later. I love that. So through your career, you have definitely had some advice given to you, probably when you were a young kid to adult life within being in the cyber industry. Mm-hmm. Has there been a point that you can think of in particular that you received really good advice? And would you mind sharing that with us? Like, what was that advice and how did that advice impact you?
I think maybe you've heard this one before, and I'll explain, give it some context. But it's the saying that, and I didn't know it at the time somebody told it to me, but when it was said to me, it was new to me, of course. But it's ideas are worthless, execution is everything. And so we can all sit around and think about what could be, what we want to do, how could our lives be better. But if you don't act on it and you don't focus and you don't do the small things, the little things, those daily things, the committing to 2 hours a day or even an hour a day to studying, or even, for your own health, 1 hour a day of exercise, things like that. If you don't have that focus and you don't put yourself in a position to commit to those time blocks during the day to do those little things, it's never going to build up. And the same thing goes for, a college education, whether you're self-taught or you're going through college. If you say, okay, I want to go back and I want to get my 4-year degree, I'd like to do that, but you never execute on it. The difference is that time frame, those 4 years are always going to go by and you never execute it. So in 4 years, you're still going to be in the same place you were today. And so people have to look in the mirror and take a hard look at themselves when they commit to taking a proactive approach to change.
Yeah, when you said the ideas are worthless, execution is everything, it reminded me about the infamous quote, words are cheap. Because you can always say, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna be a millionaire. I'm gonna launch a business, or I'm gonna go get my graduate degree." But it's the actual execution, and it's putting the work in that. It's the hardest part. That's why what's the saying? If success was easy, everybody would be successful.
Right.
I So I want to ask you the latter of that question. So the best advice. Now I want to know: was there a time in your life, Joe, that you received not so good advice, and if you did you realize it was bad advice at that time, and how did you pivot from it?
Hmm. Well, I did receive bad advice once. It was actually recently, and I knew it was bad advice, and it didn't turn out too well for me personally, at least in the short term. It was a very short term consequence, like a week. But what it did was, though, is it gave me the opportunity to back away and go in a different direction. And I ended up being happier uh, because of it. So I would say that, you know, everybody's scenarios that they experience are unique, and context matters. And whenever you get advice, backlog it in your mind and noodle it around a little bit and kind of play devil's advocate and weigh in the pros of the cons and play out the scenarios. If I do A, then this will probably happen. But if I take this advice and do B, then this will probably happen. You have to kind of forecast in your head what's going to happen next and then what's going to happen after that, because you have to think of advice as a tip that you're going to execute on, but then what chain of events are going to happen after that if I put X into play. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We call that in the military. We're always trained to pay attention to the second and third order effects of whatever you do.
Yep.
We always think about, okay, if we do, where it's actually called, we have actually a course for it. It's a military decision making process, and we go through courses of action, and then we figure out what would the adversary do, and if they did that, what would be the effects of that, or vice versa. If we
Right.
moved this way, what would happen? Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. So essentially, you just want to be a strategic thinker. Take advice as with a grain of salt as it is, and use it if it's right. If you can forecast that chain of events and the outcome is positive for you, go roll with it. And also, as you develop that strategic mindset, you're going to also fail because experience does matter. But you just keep pushing on, and every time you fail, you just have to pick yourself back up, take the hits, and keep going, because unfortunately that's life, right?
Very much so. Yes. All know that all too well. So you have already said a couple of great quotes during this interview, but I want to know, this is one of my favorite questions. Is there a particular quote that you have used in your life, or maybe there's a quote right now that you really inspires you in life? And what is that quote, and why that particular quote?
I have to look it up real quick, but it is
Absolutely.
by Gandhi.
I love Gandhi.
Yes. And the reason why I'm looking it up is because I want to make sure that I quote him word for word correctly. It is, in a gentle way, you can shake the world. And one of the things that I've learned as I've matured through life, because I think maturation is an ongoing process. We'll do that until we're 90, 100, 120, maybe, hopefully. Um, and whatever you do, whatever choices you have, know that you can always choose love.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to love each other, and we need to learn to love ourselves, because there's not enough focus. And that quote from Gandhi is what kind of made me realize those things.
Oh my God, I love that. That is so awesome. Wow, what a way to end a podcast. Before we wrap up, though, I know that some of the listeners are going to want to reach out to you either for mentoring or the class that you're going to be running very, very soon in the next coming up months. What would be the best way for them to be able to reach you?
They can add me on LinkedIn.
I love that. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Find them on LinkedIn. Information's in the show notes, so you can get all of the data there. Joe, it has been amazing. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we finally made this happen.
Yeah, no, definitely. Me too.
Thank you to all our listeners and sponsors who have made this podcast possible. You can check out all our content by going to our website at mentorproject.org. We'd love for you to contact us to get more involved. See you next week when we talk with another one of our amazing mentors.